To start with, we've seen how foreign aid has been deployed over the years in sub-Saharan Africa, and more specifically, it's been used as an instrument to promote foreign interest of donor countries. And we've also seen how it's being used to support economics. It comes in different forms, either in terms of soft loans, with reduced interest rate, or heavy loans, or foreign aid. And these are used to promote national interest of the donor countries. And in relation specifically to what has happened in Sahel Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, we can see the clear implication that we have seen France withdrawing aid. We've seen the EU also suspending aid. And of course, we know the Americans are pulling plugs on their aid. So given that situation, they need to worry about where the funds will come to support their own economy. In the first instance, Niger Republic, for instance, has been heavily dependent on foreign aid, to boost its budget and keep the economy afloat, despite the fact that it had huge mineral deposit in uranium. But we've also learned that in the course of so many years, France has also been engaging in sharp practices. And what I mean by that is ensuring that Niger is paid not the appropriate international price for uranium. And then France has the first right of offer. Not only that, the Niger Republic foreign reserves is kept in the bank in Paris, being controlled by the French government with limited access, by Niger Republic. And if they are loaning money through the foreign aid, it's still their same money that will be loaned to Niger Republic, through the bank in France. So therefore, we still don't know how heavily this will impact on Niger Republic. It will probably take another year. When we see how the resources coming, the revenue coming in from uranium export, and how taking control of their foreign reserves would boost funds, being used to finance the budget. Whether that will happen, whether Russia, which has already stepped in to assist militarily, whether they will be willing to commit more funds into Niger Republic, we still don't know. Because what we know, which is clear, is that a lot of grains are being released by Russia to Niger Republic, Mali, and Burkina Faso. So, but notwithstanding that, Niger could have gotten all this without having to break relationship, with Western countries. But you can understand the frustrations when aid becomes a burden, when many countries are saddled, with debts. In some cases, the debts have gone up by over 500%, while they are implementing structural adjustment programs dictated by IMF and World Bank. And then you now have this culture of dependence, dependency on foreign aid. Whereas corruption is also a major problem, which the foreign aid is not tackling, but rather promoting a culture of dependence.
I think it's clear that Africa has not been strategic and maybe not too aware. Awareness level among African leaders about the changing geopolitics is very low. During the Cold War era, we had most African countries like Nigeria fell under the non-allied group. And that means that we kind of wisely thought that getting trapped in the East-West conflict wouldn't be good for national development. And African countries focus more on developing their economies, building Pan-African partnership. Like Nigeria, we made it our foreign policy initiative to be Afrocentric. But what has changed? And today, clearly, an alliance with Russia that is not calibrated and well managed could draw backlash from the West. We see two opposed concepts of the world. The American-centered, Europe-American-focused world order is one that does not want Russia to be part of any either bipolar or multipolar world. So if we move towards Russia as we are doing some part of Africa, we are going to get a backlash. And the first backlash would be a sense in which maybe aids that are strategic, not multilateral, bilateral, would be less to those countries. And again, what the West will do is to isolate. There are going to be those countries that are less embedded with Russia. And they will single them out and give them support. And then those who are deeply involved with Russia will suffer the fate. The second thing that is going to happen is cultural. Even although we talk about the Western hypocrisy in terms of development, democracy promotion, and the fact that there's a negative, unintended and intended consequence of AIDS and democracy promotion. But the truth is that the West's commitment in terms of value to open society, to democracy, even if in a shallow, confusing form, is contrast with the Russian model. And so we're going to see a cultural orientation among African leaders, or in fact a justification for those who are trending towards authoritarianism. And now that we've seen military rule, resurfacing in Africa, especially in the West African coast, I think it would be a bad for governance. It would be a bad for civil society and all the buoyancy that drives entrepreneurship in the private sector that goes with that. So that's one of the, consequences of getting too close to Russia. And again, we're going to find ourselves becoming the whipping boy, because Russia's focus on Africa is not to make Africa a global power. It's also to use us to wage, and get back on the West. So we might become the sacrificial lamb, as the case might be. We lose the West, but we're not getting to Russia that will not help us. And let's not forget that Russia, is part of being, trying to assert itself in its area, is in a way a declining economic and moral power. It's still strong in GDP in terms of primary produce and oil and agro. But if you look at high tech, if you look at the staying power in terms of companies and economic growth, I think Russia is struggling. So getting allied to Russia in a way that causes the West to first move away from us and then undermine us through many strategic UN, World Bank, IMF, and several other platforms will be a disaster for Africa. So I think that in engaging Russia, the focus should be to assert ourselves as independent, to assert ourselves as interested in economic engagement, and not to be caught up in Russia's political build-up, to assert itself as against the West. I think if we're that strategic, we still retain our relationship with the West, but again, engage in Russia to be a partner at that level. Again, it's important that Russia is at the lower level of service sector. So Russia is actually where we're competing with. If you look at low manufacturing, the ones that are not high-tech enough, Russia is a country that we ought to compete against to provide those services in terms of agriculture, in terms of oil and gas. So we see Russia as a partner we can find a way to eat into their market, to displace them strategically in terms of produce. So if Russia and the West fall out, Africa can step in to provide those services in a competitive manner that Russia could have provided to the West. Example, energy resources, agriculture, and all that. So I think it's a matter of how strategic we are and understanding the changing landscape of global politics. That Russia isn't that overwhelming strong power anymore. China, maybe more than Russia, could play that role in the future, but Russia is struggling to contain the West and reassert itself and create some geopolitical influence. And so Africa shouldn't, journey with Russia in that sense of fighting the West, because there will be no much defense for us when the West hit back at us.
Yeah, the issues are two. One is military,
yes.
The other is economic. On the military front, what is happening in Ukraine, which is quite clear to the whole world, is NATO and America versus Russia. But Ukraine is the theater, the field of war, sadly.
Yeah.
And the whole of NATO's weapons are being used. The funds in billions, hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into that war, being funded by NATO. And then we have Russia resisting. So for me, militarily, Russia...
Mr. Shehu, I'm so sorry to have to interject, but I will come back to you on that. We have some breaking news now.
Assaults, including funds against it. The economy has not collapsed. Russia seems to be very close to achieving its own strategic goal in Ukraine, particularly in Luhansk and Donetsk Republic. I mean, it's just a matter of 1 or 2 months from all my readings. Now, when you look at Mali, the case of Mali is different. France was in Mali for how long? They could not solve this same problem. And then under the French intervention, we had coups and all that taking place. Now, the Russian Prigozhin-led forces move into the place, which they now call Africa Corps. We've seen they've also suffered some casualties, yet the problem has not been resolved. Contrast that with what happened in Central African Republic when Duterte was in power. The Russians came in and helped stabilize that country, and that is why Central African Republic is holding on to them. So it's a mixed fortune when you look at it from military viewpoint. Then many African countries are not constrained by the Western nations concerned by human rights, the conditions for sale of weapons. Russia would sell weapons to you if you need them, and that's on the military front. On the economic front, again, you have to look at what has been the impact of the foreign aid in Africa. Do we really need it? Because the bottom line at the end of the day is that these aids have never transformed any country. These aids are usually given to poor countries with conditions. For instance, structural adjustment policy. We've seen what happened in Zimbabwe, how it destroyed Zambia. We are also implementing some form of adjustment policies in Nigeria. Now, let's take, for instance, the case of Ghana. In 2001, we've seen what happened to Ghana when they implemented the structural adjustment policy. It went so bad that investment in education dropped to the extent that it is only one child in 400 children that could have access to secondary education because of the increased cost of education in Ghana. Take the example on corruption. Take South Sudan, for instance. If you remember in 2008, the Dura saga scandal, happened. There was famine in Southern Sudan. And the whole world, the Western countries wanted to avert the famine. So they gave $1 million, to Sudan. What happened to South Sudan? What happened to the money? The contract was awarded to fake companies. The $1 million disappeared into companies, fake companies related to the president, with nothing achieved. Again, when you look at between 2006 and 2012, South Sudan, again, with aid money inclusive, spent $1.7 billion on constructing 74 kilometers of road. 74 kilometers of road. And the contracts were awarded, to cronies, the elites. So what you see is, rather than reducing the poverty in South Sudan, it has also increased poverty. The contrast, if you take it, is in the case of Burundi and Uganda. When Burundi was under aid denial, we realized that the tax revenue went up. Between 1996 and 1998, the tax revenue went up because without foreign aid, they were able to look inwards and then, collect the appropriate taxes, and the revenue went up significantly by more than 15%. Again, in the case of, in the case of Uganda, when Uganda was at war between 1991 and 1996, there was no aid given to Uganda because of the conflict. The tax revenue went up astronomically to the extent that not that Uganda was able to fund the war, more funds were now available even after the war.